collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, in an election special programme, we'll be discussing the implications of the 2018 Cyprus presidential elections. Perhaps unsurprisingly, we're going to concentrate this week on the presidential elections here in Cyprus. The first round was held last Sunday, and the two finalists in the runoff will face each other at the ballot box this coming Sunday. They are incumbent President Nikos Anastasiadis and independent challenger with the backing of the Akel party, Stavros Malas. So earlier this week, I invited a well-known economist and political observer on the island to join me to discuss the issues. She is Fiona Mullen from Sapienta Economics. Fiona, you've been following Cyprus economy, Cyprus politics, the Cyprus problem, and pretty well anything to do with Cyprus for many, many years. Yeah. What did you make of Sunday's election?
I think it wasn't necessarily a surprise. I think everybody knew that Anastasiadis that he was going to come first, but not by as big a margin as everyone was going to hope. I think the biggest for him, okay, he came first, but the biggest loss, it looks like from the figures, was actually to, where did he lose his votes? He lost them to people who didn't turn up. So his vote was down about 63,000 compared with 2013. And the turnout was about 57,000 less, something like that. So he lost some of it to lack of turnouts, and also I think he lost a fair amount to Elam, the far-right party, and I think he might have done that by talking up the nationalist rhetoric himself. So should he lose by next week, I think that might be a lesson learned for how you approach elections.
But what about the fact that there is a small but fairly vocal contingent on the island who were very disappointed about the collapse of the Cyprus reunification talks, and although Anastasiadis has said that he is pro-solution, he didn't appear to be in July, and people sort of don't trust him anymore.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't overplay the sort of pro-solution vote. I think there certainly were. I know friends of mine who would normally have voted Anastasiadis but went for Malas.
Because we should say that he has said all along he is pro-solution and he plans to solve the problem.
Yes. I mean, put it this way, they think there's a better chance of solving it with Malas than with Anastasiadis, and they also think it's pretty urgent to solve the Cyprus problem. So they went with Malas. They may well go with him in the second round as well. For sure they wanted to keep out Papadopoulos. So it's a bit of a mix, you know. Malas did well partly because people wanted to keep Papadopoulos out, but partly because people believe he is the guy to solve the Cyprus problem. But I think the majority of Cypriot voters, to be honest, don't give a damn. So what was it about, really? I think in round two it's going to be down to the two characters of the two men, really. And that's where, you know, Malas kept the same proportion, well, not the same proportion, he got pretty much the same number of votes this time as last time, whereas Anastasiadis lost quite a lot. And if you don't, it looks like we're not going to have Vico going for one or the other candidate, so I think that might matter quite a lot.
Right, and let's talk about the parties that were the losers in this. The standard procedure has always been what we call the horse trading, mostly in exchange for ministerial positions or positions on semi-government boards, that the parties bring their voters with them. Do you think that is still the case? Because we saw Vico split fairly well down the middle, I would say, with who they would and wouldn't vote for. We saw Solidarity also losing people, and Lilikas lost a massive amount of the vote. So he's only got a couple of % to offer to either candidate anyway. And I heard that Malas, according to the Cyprus Mail, said there will be no horse trading. It does sound as if he wants to change the way politics here in Cyprus operates.
Yeah, I think, well, he might have been given an opportunity to do that if it's the case, which, as we're talking right now, it looks as though Vico isn't going to plump for one candidate or another. So that means there is no horse trading to do, which sort of gives him the freedom to select a good cabinet. And as I know you've suggested, perhaps they will. He might do well to name his entire cabinet before Sunday. So the bad thing for him is he's not going to get guaranteed support of the usual kingmaker. The good thing is it might be an opportunity to do something really fresh. We know he wants to have more than half of women in the cabinet and in the key semi-government organisations and so on. And I think that's his strongest selling point, because the negative side is people think, well, he's backed by Akel, and can we trust him on the economy?
And that's a little unfair, I think, because, yes, he was health minister between 2011 2012 in the disastrous Christofias government, and he admits that mistakes were made. So it's a little unfair, is it not, to blame the health minister for a year, for an entire government aberration, if you like, when it comes to managing the economy? I think the problem for me is that, do we know how independent he is going to be able to be from the supporting Akel party wishes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's certainly people I know who are wavering. They might like him as an individual, but they're not sure if they can trust what they expect to be Akel in charge of the economy again.
But he has said that he will name his finance minister prior to Sunday's vote.
Yes. So far, some of the rumours are not very inspiring, though, I have to say. You really should have a complete technocrat who hasn't, an accountant or something. So somebody sort of known, but not necessarily political. So that might be key, whoever he picks for that. And I think the other key thing will be the debate on, I think it's going to be on Wednesday. That will have happened by the time this is produced. But so what does Anastasiadis have going for him? He inherited an economy in a big mess, and he got us through it. Did he get us through it, or did his cabinet get us through it? I think it's more his cabinet than him.
And his finance minister in particular. Yeah,
but also commerce. They did a lot on tourism to increase capacity and so on. So, but he gave them the freedom to do that. So you can't deny that they did a good job with the economy. We don't know who's going to be in his cabinet post-election. So the suggestion that you're voting for continuity might not necessarily be completely true. It depends on who stays in the cabinet.
And it's usual, is it not, for a president after he's elected certainly to reshuffle his cabinet?
Yes, certainly some of the ministers are not expected to stick around. So, yeah, we don't really know. Is Georgiadis going to stay in the finance position? Because that will be quite important. But I think it's down to, it really will be, it's going to be economy versus character. So I do think Anastasiadis is beginning to look a little tired. And I think that came out in the presidential debate before. Not many people actually watched it, something like 10% of the entire population. But I think more people will be watching the debate in the middle of the week, because people seem to like Malas he's a polite person, he's a fresh person and so on. Anastasiadis is definitely the old guard and so on. So it will be, do I prefer Malas as a character, or do I prefer Anastasiadis on the economy? I think that's...
So does this come down to trust, actually?
Yes. Do you trust one guy on the economy, or do you trust the other guy just more generally? It's, I think, will be the key choice.
And what other issues do you think people are interested in? We've had so many promises from the incumbent about paying this and paying that, as indeed we had from some of the losers. Mm-hmm. But I think people have sort of woken up to the fact that the government is not a bottomless chest of funds to hand out willy-nilly in the hope of getting votes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, actually, in the end, what they put aside for the haircut, it was tiny. It was 25 million, and they might put in another 25 million this year. So the current government hasn't really hasn't really banded its money about that much. But I mean, the other issue, of course, and this is where it depends how much the voters really care, is on the Cyprus problem. I mean, you've got another teeny tiny opportunity because the Turkish Cypriots have just formed a coalition of younger, pro-reform, pro-solution, it's 4 parties, but the leaders, the CTP, we know they're in favour of a solution. We know that means that they will be more open to Turkish Cypriots getting ready for a solution on the economy, on all the harmonisation of the EU and so on. And that makes a big difference to how easy it is to solve the Cyprus problem. So are you going to take the bet and say, look, if Malas is more likely to make it, let's go for it, because this really, really might be the very last chance. And if it doesn't happen this time, things get a lot more scary for Cyprus. I really do think the status quo is not safe. It's much more dangerous than going for a settlement. So that's a consideration, but I'm aware that there's a minority of us who actually think like that. So I don't know how influential it will be.
So that's the economy, that's the Cyprus problem. What about social issues? We've seen in the last year or so, since the economy did improve, that the unions are starting to bang those old drums we've been so used to over the last however many decades. And that impacts on everybody's ability to consume things, which impacts the growth. We're talking again about COLA and whether it's linked or not to productivity. These are all issues that people probably, when they go to the ballot box, don't think about. Yeah. But they're all things that are part of policies that will certainly have an impact, if not immediately, within the next couple of years.
I mean, the available data shows that people are still earning less money than they did before the crisis. The whole size of the economy is still smaller than it was before the crisis. So, we all took pay cuts, and I think there's only one sector, and I forget which one it is, has actually got back to beyond where it was back in 2011. So people are feeling the pinch, and, half of all households have got non-performing loans and so on. So the top-line figures look good, but people are still, even little things like car sales are up, but it's second-hand cars people are buying. People never used to buy second-hand cars, but now they're growing a lot faster than new cars. So the amount of household spending is a lot lower than it used to be. So I think it's the kind of thing where, let's say, if I were Malas this week, I would be focusing on there seems to be an increase in inequality in Cyprus.
Well, he has said he would increase the minimum wage. Now, what impact would that have on the economy?
Oh, the jury's out, depending on which economist you talk to about that. But because, you can go the US and the UK way, where you have a lot of people in jobs but very precarious economic and social situation. Or you can go the more, let's say, Scandinavian way, where the taxes are higher, the income is higher, but you might have more social peace, let's say. And I think, the gut reaction in the old days would be, you should never raise the minimum wage. But actually, I think we've learnt that jobs, so to speak, are not necessarily good for the society in the long term.
And if people had a little bit more money, that would stimulate growth?
Yes, yeah. Or it depends. If they end up paying back the bank, then it will... it doesn't necessarily go into the economy, it goes into the...
OK, and let's talk about the banks and the non-performing loans. It's something that's been like a sword of Damocles over the entire economy for the last however many years.
Yes. Yeah.
Are we getting any closer to solving the NPL problem?
Actually, the banks are doing not so badly. When you actually look at... If you only look at the ratios, it looks like it's going down only by tiny proportions. But in terms of the actual cuts, you're looking at, I think it was nearly 2 billion for Bank of Cyprus last year, 800 million for the co-op. Hellenic was a bit slower, but it's a smaller bank anyway. So they are managing to cut non-performing loans. I did calculate that if they carry on at the same rate, we'll finally, in 7 years' time, get to the EU average rate, which is only 4.5%, and we're at 50%, 45%, I think now. So,
but how would any change in economic policy impact the way NPLs are coming down?
Well, one big overhang that was never passed, it was a bill that should have been passed during the Troika period, is this idea that you can, what's called securitized loans, which means you can take your loan, my loan and somebody else's and package it up and sell it off even on a stock market. That law hasn't been passed yet, and I would say if it's a Malas government and there's Akel influence, maybe it will never pass. But at least what the banks have been able to do is they have sold loans in packages, but to individuals, so they're not selling them on the open market, but going to individual companies and so on.
And what did the companies do with those loans?
Essentially what they get is they're getting these loans on the cheap. So they're betting on the fact that by the time the loan is paid back, or by the time they sell the collateral, they're going to make a profit on it. So, but the best way to get rid of the non-performing loans is for the economy to grow, because that's the most painless. But we'll see how tolerant the European Union's supervisors are. They might want us to do it faster. So.
And then, of course, we've had the backlash when auctions have come up of primary residences, for example, and nobody bidding, and demonstrations saying this is our home, we can't have it sold over our heads, sort of thing. What about that? Because in actual fact, it's meant that any legislation that was put in place to try and solve the problem has no teeth whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest, for whoever wins the election, one really big issue to deal with is the whole justice system. I mean, it's too slow, the judges are not very well trained, and so on and so forth, and it affects all aspects of the economy, including how fast the banks can resolve their non-performing loans, but also all kinds of other things as well. So it's a big area. Whether or not, I'm not sure that lawyers and judges are very, let's say, very, very pro-change, so we'll see how fast they can do that.
And what about e-government? If it comes to the whole way that the civil service, the whole country is run, e-government can streamline everything and presumably, by making it more efficient, in a sense, save the government money. So that has been something that certainly the current Interior Minister is very pro, and he's pretty proactive about it. How, again, would that impact a new government if they managed to get something remotely like the Estonian model in place?
Well, just to give you an example, I was looking for the most recent version of the companies law, which was amended something like 3 times in 2017, maybe 3 or 4 times in 2016. And if you go on the company registrar website, you can find only a mention of the last change in March 2016. You can't find the most recent consolidated companies law anywhere on a government website in Cyprus. You can pay €150 to get it in hard copy from a private company. But so little things like this, if you're trying to set up a company and you don't know what the law is, and we're talking about a Greek version, let alone an English version, it's quite difficult. So, yeah, we're sort of starting to get there, but yeah, the Estonians are way, way ahead. Another small country, but they're streets ahead of us.
All right, well, we're not going to do any predictions about Sunday's vote. In fact, in the current climate globally, it's pretty hard to predict anything, I think, when it comes to elections. But let's come back, if we may, to the whole political scene in Cyprus, and the fact that with Papadopoulos' massive trouncing, we could say, at the polls last Sunday, where does that leave Diko? Traditionally, they have been the kingmakers. They've always been somehow involved in whichever government wins. And it looks like, if they're going to give a free vote, that may not be the case. Where does that leave Nicholas Papadopoulos as leader of Diko? Is the whole party going to look inside upon itself and think, where do we go from here? Or has he got this sort of dynastic thing And we've got a lot of that in certain areas of politics in Cyprus, that like father, like son, and like grandson sort of thing. So where does that leave the whole scene in terms of the future?
I think that, well, I fully expect there to be some kind of leadership challenge now with Papadopoulos. In fact, I wonder whether that wasn't the plan of the Garian faction all along, so the other part of Zico that supported Anastasiadis.
But let's just say that there are reports in the press, I'm not sure if it was today or yesterday, that the party itself, and I think in particularly Marcos Ciprianou, is saying, hang on a minute, when Garoyan was leader and people didn't vote with the official party, he kicked them out. And that's what we should do with Garoyan. Where would that leave the whole party? Because Garoyan took with him a fairly substantial part of the Zico faithful.
Yes, yeah. Well, this is where I think Zico is having a bit of an existential crisis. So there's the pro-Garian faction, the pro-Papadopoulos faction, and if they're not in government, which they won't be if they don't support either candidate, then they've got nothing better to do than just fight it out among each other. So I think it won't be clear, really, where is Zico going for a few years. But it's interesting, yeah, it has always been, in a sense, the party of government, because they've been the kingmaker. And now they're faced with losing that power, which is really what they care about. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out.
And the thing we didn't mention was the rather surprising to many people, 5% or thereabouts, that far-right Elam, with their racist and other overtones, garnered in last Sunday's poll. Now, Malas says he won't even talk to them, he's not even going to fill in their questionnaire. But Anastasiadis apparently is going to fill in the questionnaire, and one would assume that they would lean much closer towards Anastasiadis than they would to Malas.
Yes, I mean, it's sort of good and bad news. Some people worried they might get as much as 10%. They got 5.7 in the end, so it's not as bad as it might have been. But clearly the far right is on the rise all over the place. And it's, I think, going back to what we were talking about, social issues, it's a reflection of the fact that there is a, it's not so pronounced in Cyprus, but there is a split between the haves and the have-nots, and there's a certain feeling that it's always the elites who get the jobs and so on and so forth. And once you have the combination of that, plus, I have to say, I think Anastasiadis did whip up nationalist feeling from early 2017 onwards. You know, that's what you get. It's right across Europe and America now, it's no longer taboo to express the kind of views that Elam openly espouses. So it's worrying. They got a lot more than last time. But I don't know. Anastasiadis is not going to answer all the questions, apparently, so we'll see.
And what about the other smaller parties? The Greens, for example, they have a reasonable amount of following. I haven't heard too much on environmental issues from either of the candidates.
Yeah. I don't know. I think they got, if they hadn't hooked up with one of the other parties for the parliamentary elections, I think the Greens wouldn't have made it at all. So, but yeah, to another issue that wasn't much, I think the Cyprus Mail wrote about it, though, that wasn't talked about much in the campaign, was this whole issue of Cyprus's international reputation. We have a terrible reputation for probity, as one might call it, and there's stories every single week saying Cyprus, Russia, money laundering, Trump, blah blah, and nobody's mentioned it. It's like it doesn't exist in Cyprus. But it's going to affect our business, and somebody needs to deal with it. So the only one who has at least hinted at it is Malas, saying, we want to clean things up. It's kind of a strong hint that he wants to deal with corruption and so on. But unless you've got everyone behind it realising that this is actually quite a problem for us, then I don't think it'll happen.
Well, we'll find out, won't we, on Sunday when Cypriots go to the polls for the second time for the runoff in the 2018 presidential elections. That was Fiona Mullen from Sapienta Economics. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.